o'lgan ko'chalarda Ümit üzme aziz xalqim Ümit üzme ey ana yurt Biz atlandık bu küreşke Uyul taştak uyuşup Allah verse bu nusretni Bizgilerimiz sep bulup Zalimlarni yığlatgudek Uğuz gibi küçlük bulup Lepildeydu asminimda Göz çaknitip şu günü Ay yıldızlık gök bayrağım Ey ana makam Ay yıldızlık gök bayrağım
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Dear brothers and sisters, welcome to another special episode on Talk East Turkestan. Today, as you've seen in the ad, we are talking to a very special guest, none other than Benedict Rogers. Benedict Rogers is a human rights activist and writer specializing in Asia. He's the co-founder and chief executive of Hong Kong Watch, senior analyst for East Asia at the human rights organization CSW, an advisor to both the Inter-Parliamentary Alliance on China, IPAC, and the Stop Uyghur Genocide Campaign. A member of the board of the China Democracy Foundation and the co-founder and deputy chair of the UK Conservative Party Human Rights Commission. He lived in Hong Kong from 1997 to 2002 and visited China many times, but in 2017 was denied entry to Hong Kong on the orders of Beijing. He also specializes in Myanmar, Burma, North Korea, and Indonesia, and is the author of 6 books, including 3 on Myanmar. I'd like to welcome to our podcast today, Mr. Benedict Rogers. How are you, sir?
Thank you very much. I'm very well, thanks. Good to be with you.
Thank you for accepting this interview. Brothers and sisters, you may have seen in the description, we'll today be looking at the Darkness Report, which was published back in January 2021, and we'll be discussing the issues of China, the Uyghurs, Tibetans, Hong Kong, Taiwan, and everything relating to China, the CCP, the regime. So my first question this evening to you, sir, the report's main purpose, and others like it, seems to be about shedding light on China's oppression within its borders. For those that follow what's been going on, it isn't news. But by and large, your average UK, Australian, American citizen isn't aware that a genocide is happening in the 21st century, despite all the evidence pointing to one. Why isn't this resonating with people? And why aren't there hundreds of thousands of people on the streets, just like we've seen, say, with the Black Lives Matter movement or climate change rallies?
I think that's a great question. I think that awareness and opinion is starting to change. I remember when the same group, the Conservative Party Human Rights Commission, that published The Darkness Deepens last January, when we published a report in 2016, which was called The Darkest Moment, which was equally clear about how appalling the human rights crisis across China, including the situation for the Uyghurs, was. The political response in the UK, in Parliament, in government, and in the public in general, was extremely, well, at best muted, and in certain quarters, people were very unhappy that we'd published that report, because at the time, the UK and China were at the height of what they called the so-called golden era of Sino-British relations. I think now, 4 or 5 years on, the response to our latest report was very different. People were much more receptive to it. So I think awareness and opinion is changing. There's a much greater level of media coverage of the Uyghur genocide. We've seen, of course, the US administration, both the outgoing and the incoming ones, declare it a genocide. The Canadian and Dutch parliaments and a number of institutions and legal experts calling it genocide. So opinion is shifting in the right direction, but it's still slow. And I think there are several reasons for that. Probably one is, of course, China's economic influence around the world. One is the perception that a country that has grown as fast and as significantly economically and in terms of development and technology as China has, in the average person's mind, they might be thinking, well, how can this be a country that's committing genocide when it's produced such remarkable technological and economic development? So those are different factors that I think are in there. But I'm encouraged that awareness and opinion has shifted in the last year or two.
Yeah, as we mentioned, this report was published back in January. What's been the response by the UK government, NGOs? And I'm particularly interested in religious groups because the report touches on, not just touches on, covers the religious persecutions of Muslims, Christians, Buddhists, and Falun Gong practitioners. And also, has there been any backlash from the CCP?
It's on the last point. I'm a little surprised that actually we haven't had any backlash from the CCP to this report. I've had backlash from the CCP on lots of other occasions.
On a personal level.
On a personal level, yeah. and with previous reports. But for some reason, I'm not aware of any particular response from them to this report. In terms of the response from government and Parliament and the other groups that you've mentioned, I think that in Parliament, the response has been extremely encouraging. And if I contrast it with the previous report in 2016, it was very difficult to get hardly any members of Parliament to support that report and to speak out on it. Now, we were able to gather the support of a significant number of parliamentarians behind the report, and the report is endorsed by 2 former foreign secretaries, 2 former party leaders, the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, and other senior parliamentarians. So the body of opinion in Parliament, I think, is very much with us. In government, there was also a shift compared to 2016, where in 2016 the British government were really quite unhappy with us for publishing this report. This time, I was told by senior people in the Foreign Secretary's office and in 10 Downing Street that they were looking at our report, they welcomed it, they were taking it very seriously, engaging with it. They haven't gone as far as I would like them to go in a policy response, and there's a lot more work to do to move the government further in the right direction. And you may be aware that just this week, the government published its integrated review. And although they acknowledge the human rights situation in China, they still are trying to pursue a sort of dual approach of speaking out on human rights, but at the same time pursuing increased trade and investment. So there's clearly more work to be done to move government policy, but at least the tone and the responsiveness of government to our report was much more constructive than in the past. And in terms of NGOs and religious groups that you mentioned, quite a number of NGOs gave evidence through our report and certainly welcomed it when it came out. In terms of religious groups, I think on the particularly the Uyghur genocide, but also other issues, I've been really encouraged by the role of religious leaders. Last August, there was a letter signed by about 40 or 50 religious leaders, including the former Archbishop of Canterbury, Rowan Williams, and of course the Jewish community. The Board of Deputies of British Jews and the Chief Rabbi have really led the way in championing the cause of the Uyghurs. So religious leaders definitely play a very important role in this.
This report touches on freedom of expression in the media. And for those that follow Talk East Turkestan, I've always said that if China have nothing to hide, then why hasn't unfettered access been given to the Uyghur region? And if one day they were to, it may end up like the World Health Organization's investigation into COVID-19. I mean, even the COVID-19 cover-up should have sounded alarm bells around the world, but countries are still willing to go back to business as usual.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. The crackdown across the board in China on media freedom has been really alarming. I mean, China, of course, has never had full media freedom, and the Communist Party has always been repressive. But there was a time, maybe 12, 15 years ago, where there was a certain amount of space for citizen journalists, bloggers, kind of semi-independent media, and also human rights defenders, civil society. And I, traveled to China during that time and met with people involved in those areas. And there was a certain amount of space. They knew, of course, that they were restricted. There were red lines that they couldn't cross. But nevertheless, there was that space. And really, under Xi Jinping, that space has completely disappeared. And the citizen journalists we've seen trying to cover the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, they were all rounded up and jailed and disappeared. So as you say, if China had nothing to hide on any of these issues, why don't they allow space for both domestic media and for foreign journalists? And instead, they've eliminated the space for independent media in China, but also made life much more difficult for foreign correspondents and even expelled some foreign journalists. So it's a very alarming situation for the media in China.
I mean, you followed what's been going on in China for decades. The argument that, under Xi Jinping's China, so-and-so, ... is happening. But it's the whole system, it's the party. Like, we didn't see much change or freedom during, the time of Hu Jintao or Jiang Zemin or Deng Xiaoping. I mean, Deng Xiaoping a bit, or, from the beginning. So could we say that what if Xi does end up leaving or goes away, that things are going to get a lot better in China?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it's certainly not just about one man's leadership. It is about the whole system. And for him to have, for what has happened on his watch or under his leadership to have happened, had to have been allowed and supported and facilitated by the whole system, not just by him. But it's also true to say that he has taken the repression to a whole new level. Of course, under the previous leaders, the Uyghurs and Christians and dissidents and independent journalists and everybody were certainly not free and certainly faced real repression. But under his leadership, he's taken it to a completely new level and resulted in a genocide of the Uyghurs that, under previous leaders, one would have called it persecution, discrimination. I don't think the word genocide was applied under previous leaders, but it certainly is justified given what's happened under his rule.
Going off topic for a bit with regards to the report, most recently we've been seeing and hearing a lot about the coup in Myanmar. Now, you're an expert of the region. What sort of influence does China have there and other regions in Asia, particularly the South China Sea?
China has significant influence. I don't think that there is any evidence to suggest, and I wouldn't suggest that China in any way instigated the coup. But I certainly think that it's undeniable that they have given the military that's carried out this coup huge diplomatic and political cover. The coup leader, General Min Aung Hlaing, actually met the Chinese foreign minister a few weeks before the coup. And I think it's very unlikely that he would have gone ahead with the coup if he hadn't had some kind of nod from Beijing that if he did it, Beijing wouldn't oppose it, would give them some cover. And of course China at the UN Security Council has prevented any meaningful action being taken. China is a major economic lifeline for the military and provider of arms for the military. Chinese state media described the coup as a major cabinet reshuffle, which is, if it wasn't such a tragic situation, that would be actually quite funny because it's such a ridiculous way of describing it. So definitely China has a significant role. And equally, if China were to choose to use its influence more constructively, it actually could play a more positive role, because if it were to remove that diplomatic and economic lifeline for the military, if it were to urge the military to rethink and to step down and to return the country to civilian democratic rule, that could make a difference. So either way, China has an important role to play. And of course, in the South China Seas, its aggression there is extremely worrying and sets China on a collision course with much of the rest of the region and the world.
I just want to take a question from one of our followers here. They've written, we know that the Belt and Road Initiative and other economic deals play a strong influence on international governmental response to this genocide. How can this be curtailed?
Yeah, I think it is definitely a major factor, and it's very disturbing that a lot of countries that one would have thought, particularly Muslim majority countries that one would have thought would have spoken out for the Uyghurs, have been silent, or in some cases even worse than silent, have actually supported the regime in its actions. And that's, I think, in large part due to the Belt and Road. So I think one of the ways to counter that is for countries as much as possible to diversify their supply chains, their strategic dependency, and not put all our eggs in one basket economically with China, because countries that have ended up being so dependent on China have found that there's a political price to pay, and a moral price to pay in terms of being silenced. Amid rising tensions between the US and China, China is constantly threatening war, especially when it comes to Taiwan.
How likely is that reality, or is that just more of China's wolf warrior diplomacy?
Well, I certainly hope that it's only China's wolf warrior diplomacy and not more than that, because nobody wants war. But I also think that if we allow the regime in Beijing to get away with a genocide against the Uyghurs, but also the dismantling of democracy and autonomy and freedom in Hong Kong, in flagrant violation of an international treaty, the Sino-British Joint Declaration. If we allow them to get away with that without any consequences at all, then I fear that a war becomes more likely, because I fear that it will be emboldened to take really drastic action against Taiwan. And in that situation, I think it's very difficult to see the democratic world, the free world, standing idly by. And so a few years ago, if you'd suggested that a war with China was on the cards, I would have been much more skeptical. I would have thought it's extremely unlikely. I think every day that passes without us standing up to China in non-military means, by imposing targeted economic sanctions, by really speaking out and using diplomatic pressure. Every day that we don't do that brings the danger of a far more drastic situation closer.
You know, this regime that locks up, enslaves, tortures, executes people, and harvests their organs simply for thinking, speaking, and practicing religions for decades now. Many say, well, we should do something about this. And even when people and those in power read this report, they will certainly have that feeling. What is that something or some things that need to be done to stop this dictatorship and the cruelty it causes on a daily basis?
Well, I think, first of all, we, when I say we, I mean essentially the whole world, or most, as much of the world as possible, need to firstly wake up to the reality and acknowledge it. That's the first. I think that for too long, governments have and other institutions, universities, media, businesses have stuck their heads in the sand and either not wanted to hear this news or heard it and hoped it would go away. And that's not the approach to take. We need to face reality. But then I think the more that the free world can stand together and take a coordinated response, the better. When individual countries take piecemeal measures, the regime in China can play countries off each other and pick them off one by one. But if countries actually stand together and face China collectively and say these things are unacceptable and impose coordinated, carefully targeted sanctions and reduce our economic dependency on China, that may start to have some effect. So standing together against this regime is the right approach.
You know, you've written many books. We see the work that you do on social media. What's next for you? Is there anything happening in the pipes to stop this regime? Any books coming out? Any more reports coming through? Or
I haven't got any particular reports or books lined up at the moment, but who knows? Maybe further down the line. But the immediate things on my agenda are. Currently I'm immersed in both the fallout from what's happened in Hong Kong, continuing to speak out on the Uyghur genocide and deal with try to help people in Myanmar in this current crisis. There is the genocide amendment to the trade bill in the British Parliament, which has gone back and forth between the House of Commons and the House of Lords, I think 3 times now, and it comes back to the House of Commons next week, in fact on Monday next week, once again. And I've been involved in a small way. Others have played a much bigger part, but I've been involved in supporting that amendment. So I hope that we can either get it through on Monday, or if not, we'll certainly look at what the next step in that fight is, because I think it's really important for the UK to establish a mechanism that allows us to legally determine genocide and then develop a response accordingly. So those are some of the things that are on my immediate horizon. And as to books and reports, I'm sure there will be more, but no immediate ideas at this stage.
As to that genocide determination you've mentioned, a few countries have labeled it genocide, parliaments. It's been labeled by a few countries. How important is that determination? And what are we likely to see after it's been determined, for example, in the UK as a genocide? What's likely to happen after that?
Well, I think one of the reasons governments are reluctant, and in a sense rightly so, because genocide is such a both specific and such a grave crime. It's the crime of crimes. One of the reasons governments are reluctant to use the term is that under the Genocide Convention, it carries a responsibility to do something to stop it, to prevent it. Of course, other grave human rights violations ought to and do carry a moral responsibility, but under the Genocide Convention, there's actually a legal responsibility to stop genocide or to prevent it. So if a genocide determination is made, it will then compel governments to do something. What they will do, they have a range of options. It could be simply saying we won't do trade agreements with a genocidal regime, which was the original idea of the genocide amendment to the trade bill. It might mean imposing sanctions. It might open the way for some further criminal proceedings. I mean, one of the challenges, of course, is that the current international judicial mechanisms, the International Criminal Court or the International Court of Justice, are almost impossible at the moment to do anything on China on, because of China's veto power and because it's not a signatory to relevant treaties. But maybe a genocide determination in a UK court, let's say, or the independent Uyghur Tribunal, which is currently underway, and I don't want to prejudge their conclusions, but they will make a legal opinion in due course. Either of those things could open the way then for perhaps an ad hoc justice mechanism. So there are various things that could be done, ranging from suspending trade agreements or not proceeding with trade agreements, targeted sanctions, and potentially justice and accountability mechanisms.
Brothers and sisters, as I mentioned before, you can find, we'll put the description to where you can find the Deepening Darkness report released by the Conservative Party Human Rights Commission. And I urge everybody to follow the work of Benedict Rogers on Twitter. He updates very regularly. And make sure you follow him there. Before I let you go, Benedict, is there any final words we can part with?
Well, thank you so much. I think, firstly, it's a privilege to be with you today. And I think my final words would be, don't give up. The darkness is deep, as the title of the report shows, and it may get deeper still before it gets lighter. But the sun does eventually rise in the morning after the night, and there will come a time where both for the Uyghurs and the people of East Turkestan and all the peoples living under Chinese Communist Party repression will one day see their freedom. And I've been involved in other struggles for human rights where unexpectedly situations that seemed hopeless have turned a corner and have seen better days and freedom itself. And so I believe that will come for the Uyghurs and for Tibetans and Falun Gong and Christians of China and people of Hong Kong and everybody living in Chinese under Chinese rule at the moment. When that day will come, obviously no one can predict, but we have to keep working for it. And I'll continue to stand with you for as long as it takes.
Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone that's joined us today. Make sure everyone shares the report, reads the report, and actually find out what's actually happening. Educate yourself, educate others. And until next time, brothers and sisters, I'd like to thank Benedict Rogers as well. Don't leave us. I'm just going to close out the show, and then we're going to have a few words, and then I'll let you go after that. Okay, brothers and sisters, until next time, peace be upon you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Ümit üzme aziz halqim, ümit üzme ey ana yurt. Biz atlandık bu güreşke, o yıl taştek uyuşup. Allah verse bu nusretni, bizgilerimiz sep bulur.